Several children, colleagues and relatives paid tribute to Fiacre Beji, the Beninese tour guide who was killed during the kidnapping of the two French tourists in the Penjari Park in Benin. Gathered at Nati Tengu, these people prayed for his name to live on in people's memories. As a new step in seeking an arrangement between the Sudanese army and the representatives of protesters, the two sides agreed on a 3-year political transition period before power is transferred to civilians. Hundreds of Somali high school students demonstrated Tuesday in the streets of Mogadishu to protest against the cancellation of national exams, whose statements had leaked on social networks. These are our top stories. Stay tuned for more details in this newscast. 4 years after his last visit to Gabon, the Ivorian President Alassane Dramane Ouattara arrived this Wednesday in Libreville for a working and friendship visit to the country. During his meeting with his Gabonese counterpart, the two heads of state will have exchanges of views on the reinforcement of bilateral and multi-sectoral cooperation between Libreville and Abidjan, and also on topics of common interest related inter alia to peace issues, security and development of Central and West Africa. Côte d'Ivoire and Gabon have enjoyed excellent cooperative relations since independence. At the Regional Episcopal Conference of West Africa, Burkina Faso President Roch Marc Christian Kabore condemned a series of terrorist attacks against Catholics in which 10 people were killed in 2 days. Burkina Faso has suffered from increasingly frequent and deadly attacks under jihadist groups targeting Christians as well as Muslims, which they consider are not radical enough or accused of collaborating with the authorities. The attacks on churches is part of the jihadist strategies, according to experts, while Christians and Muslims live together very well in Burkina Faso. According to Paul Umaru Kowalaga, a geopolitical consultant and Sahel specialist, this is just something that fits into the logic of terrorists. The Sahel specialist said they first started with a certain number of symbolic targets, namely the defense forces, which are their first enemies, then the major economic and financial infrastructures like hotels. Now they are targeting army headquarters, teachers, and so on and so forth. All this is something well thought out, and things are only getting worse, he continues. A small gathering at Nati Tengu where several children, colleagues and relatives came together in order to pay tribute to Fiacre Beji, the 30-year-old Beninese tour guide killed during the kidnapping of the two French tourists in the Penjari Park. Their prayers were for Fiacre Beji to live on in people's memories. Kasim Sani, head of a travel agency, says, "We are not going to give up and are not going to be afraid of anything. The park is open. We are going to pay tribute to our colleague, a very dear brother. I think if we give up, the evil will win. And as a last word to Fiacre Beji, may his soul rest in peace," he concluded. In Nati Tengu, in the north of Benin, visitors and neighbors parade under a large tree to offer their condolences to the family of Fiacre Beji. His wife is sitting on a mat, her legs stretched out and her eyes lost, a crucifix hanging on her neck. The mother of the deceased is at her side. She welcomes the guest with her eyes reddened and filled with tears. Women are so much affected and cannot utter a single word. According to his brother Alexandre Beji, no one in the family till now realizes what happened. It's a nightmare for the whole family, he told the French press agency. He was part of the 30th accredited tour guide to drive tourists through this 4,700 square kilometers park and was one of the best, said the director of the Penjari Park, James Terjanian. Very moved by the tragedy, he says, "You cannot blame his work. It's a huge loss for the country." Fiacre Beji had taken the two tourists along the Penjari River, which separates Benin from Burkina, dried up at this time of the year, where there are ponds and where the animals came to drink, according to his colleagues. Benin is a country that until then was spared of any terrorist attacks and has never experienced any conflict in its history, while Burkina Faso, a country also very popular with European tourists, has been under terrorist attacks for some years now by the jihadist groups. This is a new step in the search for an agreement between the Sudanese army and the representatives of demonstrators. The two parties have therefore agreed on the period of political transition that will last 3 years for the transfer of power to civilians. An arrangement between civilians and military in Sudan marked by scenes of cheering and shouts of joy. This is the evidence that the two sides have finally agreed, but on a transitional period of 3 years instead of 2, as previously required by the military, and 4 years as required by the Alliance for Freedom and Change in the beginning. Mohamed Adam, one of the protesters, said they were optimistic about the agreement between the Alliance for Freedom and Change and the Military Council because this is a victory for the Sudanese people, a victory over the heirs of the outgoing regime, and a victory over the attempts by regional powers to defeat the Sudanese revolution. According to Mohamed Adam, only one question remains: who will guarantee this agreement? Nearly 15 days of negotiations, who will guarantee its implementation? A few hours later, General Yasser Atta, a member of the Military Council, publicly announced this new resolution to restore democracy. The general said that they agreed on a 3-year transition period. The first 6 months will be allocated to the signing of agreements for peace and the end of the war in the country, and added that they promised their people that the agreement will be fully completed within 24 hours so that it may meet the expectations of the people. According to the general, progress has been made on the prerogatives and composition of the future Legislative Assembly. Of the 300 seats, the Alliance for Freedom and Change would have 2/3. The rest of the assembly will be kept for other political forces. Hundreds of Somali high school students, very angry, got down into the street of Mogadishu on Tuesday following the announcement on Monday by Education Minister Abdullahi Goda to cancel the 6 exams that had already been taken, adding that the entire process would start over at the end of May. One student declares, "We showed up and sat for the exams during the last 3 days, but still the Minister of Education announced that these exams have been cancelled and postponed to May 27th, which we will not accept." The demonstrating students are claiming their results and demanding the departure of the Minister of Education from the government. These protesters demonstrating against the cancellation of exams by the government say on one hand that they have worked hard to prepare these exams, and on the other hand they accuse the government for being irresponsible and for selling the exams through bribery. Without specifying the origins of this leak, the Minister of Education indicated that the documents would have come from one of the 90 exam centers where parents of students purchased them from. About 31,000 high school students are concerned by the cancellation of these exams. Victim of a duly substantiated judicial error, the American Valentino Dixon spent 28 years behind bars. For the first time since he was released, he returned to prison to tell detainees how he got saved by golf, and today allows him to advocate for reforms in the criminal justice system among a very wide audience. Valentino Dixon, 49 years old, grew up in a black and underprivileged district of Buffalo in the northeastern United States. He had never set a single foot on Putting Green when his life changed one evening in August 1991. Another man finally confessed to journalists that he had pulled the trigger, but the authorities did not question him. 8 witnesses had cleared him, but at his trial, his lawyer did not summon any of them, and he was then sentenced to 39 years in prison. He spent the first 7 years behind bars to mope before throwing himself wholeheartedly into the drawing. He devotes up to 10 hours a day, develops his own techniques, and impresses his entourage. From now on, Valentino also meets with relatives of detainees who claim their innocence. Like him, they hope that the media coverage of their cases by students will help to set them free. The example of Valentino Dixon should surely inspire other prisoners to believe in their potential and hope that someday their situation will be better. Several children, colleagues, and relatives paid tribute to Fiacre Beji, the Beninese tour guide who was killed during the kidnapping of the 2 French tourists in the Penjari Park in Benin. Gathered at Nati Tengu, these people prayed for his name to live on in people's memories. As a new step in seeking an arrangement between the Sudanese army and the representatives of protesters, the two sides agreed on a 3-year political transition period before power is transferred to civilians. Hundreds of Somali high school students demonstrated Tuesday in the streets of Mogadishu to protest against the cancellation of national exams, whose statements had leaked on social networks. That's all for our newscast today. Stay tuned on Gabon 24 for more news.